All right, today I am super stoked, and I feel like I say this at a lot of the beginning of the podcast, but honestly, I do feel genuinely excited to talk about all of the topics that I share when it's just a one-on-one solo podcast like this, or have any of our guests. And I think that makes the huge difference in, I think when you hear somebody talking and they just kind of are going through the motions. They're just answering the questions between that and somebody who's really passionate about what they're doing. And right now, I'm really passionate about something that I've just created. And I wish that this would have been around decades ago. I wish when I had my children that this would have been available. I wish when I was younger and kind of navigating, health things and stuff like that, that I had some kind of resource. And so I want to actually talk a little bit about the natural medicine history and the reason why teaching of natural medicine practices was actually pushed out of the medical education system. And now it's called quote unquote alternative medicine. And is probably one of my biggest pet peeves is because it is actually the first form of medicine. Pharmaceuticals and things of that nature are actually the second. They are actually the alternate choice and something that is man-made versus something that nature provided. And I think there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in how our body recognizes it. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of all of that today, because those are some of the founding or the foundational intro videos in my You Are the Medicine membership. This is a membership where when you're entered into this community, okay, there you'll be able to search and kind of look up all these different trainings that are available to you on different topics, such as like skin issues that you're having, digestion issues, things like sunburn or, tinnitus, or what's going on with my dandruff on my scalp. It's not searchable in the sense that where it's like you can kind of search it and it pops up yet, but that is in the pipeline. Currently, you'll have access, though, to a living library of all these different trainings so you can become better informed and make true informed consent decisions about your health. And this is why I wanted to talk a bit about the history of natural medicine and kind of how we got to where we are today. And there are, oh gosh, it's like, where do I kind of start with all of this? And there's so many things that are online and things that I think a lot of stuff has nuggets of truth, but not actually the entire truth. And so the reason that natural medicine was pulled out or pushed out of that kind of healthcare model comes down more to education and funding than it actually does to the benefits of natural medicine, which I think is, for me, one of the hardest things to wrap your mind around is if there are protocols and if there are offerings to people that could help them with their health. I think when you're taking the Hippocratic oath and saying do no harm and saying that those things are not viable options, I think is actually harmful. And if I'm being honest, I don't think that makes you the best provider or practitioner to downplay other avenues of health, especially ones that you know nothing about. It's not taught in the Western, or sometimes it's referred to as allopathic model of medicine, which is the model of medicine that's taught in most universities. And so when we look at, okay, well, why did this happen then? If natural medicine and things like herbalism, homeopathy, osteopathy, chiropractic, if those were all kind of the norm, how did they get actually pulled from the medical model that is now taught in traditional universities today? And this actually goes back to before there was a huge shift in what called, or the publishing of what's called the Flexner Report. This actually happened before that report came out in 1910. So it's important that you understand this, is that all of those things were very normal and a part of medical practice up until that point. And a lot of this comes more down to that you would be an apprentice, you would have some type of, it wasn't just like a year-long internship, even things like being in the Guild of Herbalists It's several years, 8+ years to be inducted into this guild of herbalists. The same as somebody who would go to a traditional medical school. Okay, so, but the difference is just like how maybe your GP might recommend certain medications or pharmaceuticals, and another one might never recommend that. They might say, hey, this is not my favorite. I prefer to go with this. Everybody has their preferences in the way that they relate to things and the way that they see it being a benefit or a hindrance or the results that they see. And that's really based on, and this is a huge part of it, is your prerogative, your perspective, your opinion, your lived experience and wisdom changes the way that you relate to information. And that's really important because that also means the practitioner that you choose is really important. So the Flexner Report came out in 1910. Before this, things like herbalism, homeopathy, chiropractic, osteopathics, things like that were very traditional for you to go to, very normal. The problem is that you can't patent or trademark an herb. So in all of these practices, what's used is not just, something that is, it's all created from nature. And so what's happening then is because you can't patent that or contain it or hold it and say it's yours, it's then not profitable. So prior to this, about in 1901, Rockefeller actually started the Rockefeller Foundation and funded the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901. So this started several years before the Flexner Report was even published. And this foundation heavily funded medical schools after the Flexner Report. So that's important to know, is that this situation, that this shift and change that happened in 1910, started actually before that, when Rockefeller started funding medical education. Now, he is not a medicine man, so to speak. He's not a physician. He's an oil guy, right? But oil had a lot of money, so he had a lot of funds to put someplace. And at this point, he's started to buddy up with Carnegie. Okay, so the Flexner Report was actually commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation and written by Abraham Flexner, who was an educator. And they basically went through all of these schools and said, hey, according to these standards, which apparently they're the only person that knows the standards that should be in the medical system, not anybody else, okay? That according to these standards, these are all the things that you need to hit. And they evaluated 155 medical schools. And what they were finding is that there were, most schools, according to them, were substandard. They thought the clinical training was not sufficient. But again, take into mind that when people are finishing school, it's almost like, or when people are finishing their training for herbalism, or when people are finishing like their homeopathy, they typically go underneath, just like you would like a residency or something like that, with somebody for several years. So just like in regular medical school, where you then go in and kind of get more training on your specialty or what you're focusing on, that was a very common practice, but that's not studied in particular in the Flexner Report. So they also recognized they were then recommending something like, well, what about laboratory-based biomedical science? What about these? What about removing the integrative medicine, right? Mind-body practices, things like that. We need to reduce this to something that we can guarantee some kind of results, right? This is the input, this is the output. Which, of course, you want some kind of predictability, because if you're putting a lot of money and a lot of funding behind it, you need to be able to quote unquote prove or be able to anticipate outcomes. Because then it creates, again, a system where you're like, fine, putting money into this to develop this product. This product needs to deliver these results. Okay. So this is really important to understand, because there was all this funding for the Institute for Medical Research that was happening. And as soon as the Flexner Report came out, that all of these schools, quote unquote, underperformed, here comes in Rockefeller and he starts funding specific schools. ones that focused more on pharmacology, ones that were more integrated within universities. They were not standalone schools, and ones that adopted a lot more of a laboratory science perspective. So this is huge because this is where the turn starts to happen in schools that were rooted in herbal medicine, homeopathy, mind-body medicine, anything like that. Now they're not receiving funding because the person that benefits is the person that, again, can fund it, right? If you're not going to focus on pharmacology, if you're not going to focus on, which is oil-based, okay? So this is why it's important. Pharmacology and pharmaceuticals started as an oil base. So you would take an oil base derivative and then you would combine it with the active ingredient that you would find in a plant. So say, vitamin C would be extracted from oranges. They would take the ascorbic acid, combine that with a petroleum-based or other derivative in that same realm. So some of them are a coal-tar based. And then that's sellable. Then I can patent that and I can sell you those things. I can't, though, patent this is my orange, right? Oranges, unless you're, again, changing and messing with some of the genome, it can't be yours and it can't be patented. Just like you can't patent milk thistle. It's not your milk thistle. Milk thistle is a plant and everybody has access to these things. So when you don't have the ability to control that, you also then aren't going to get the funding. So at this point, between 1910 and about 1930, nearly half of all U.S. and Canadian medical schools closed. And that basically kind of wiped out the homeopathy schools, the naturopathic schools for the most part. So it wasn't that it made anything illegal. It made it so that Rockefeller and Carnegie controlled the education and what was funded for education and the ability for people to pay for these things, which also meant that because I'm funding it, I'm also controlling what you learn. And then as a result, I'm creating the content at which you're learning and then you're taking to your clients or your patients. So it became this streamline of, if you learn that the way to fix it is a pharmaceutical, then you buy the pharmaceutical. Your patient who's continuing to buy this is also funding my company that is petroleum based. Because now I'm not just in the oil industry, I'm in the pharmacological industry. So this is where it starts to become, I think there's a lot of misinformation and they're like, well, the Flexner Report, and there's lots of stuff out there on social media. And this was a huge change, but what people don't realize, it's not the Flexner Report alone that changed it. It was years prior that Rockefeller had basically started to prop up this education on biomedical sciences so that when this happened, again, when you have friends, you know when things are happening, you can basically be there to save the day. So again, these standards that they judged all these schools by, who set these standards? It was the Carnegie Foundation. If the Carnegie Foundation and the people that are in charge of it are buddy-buddy with Rockefeller, this is how they're making money. So it really became a lot more of a financial business model and how can we make money in this instead of a how can we get people well model. So, and once this starts to happen, a lot of early pharmaceuticals relied heavily on this chemical synthesis that's starting to happen, right? Kind of like we talked about with the orange and the petroleum base, right? We needed the vitamin C from the orange. We put it with something else. Now I can package it up. I can trademark it and I can sell it to you. And Bayer, which is a German chemical company, was one of these pioneers in synthetic drugs. They were some of the first drugs on the market were things, again, like Tylenol and aspirin and things like this. And so it really became a lot more aligned with money and funding and capitalism and laboratory sciences. And again, now being able to kind of fund the research for how can we create more pharmaceuticals that suppress symptoms and then get rid of symptoms, but don't actually focus on, does this actually bring this person into wellness? So again, there's no direct evidence of this, this was this and the changing of hands and, things of that nature. But if we're watching how things start to roll out, it's kind of one of those like, like that's interesting. So now there's a lot more financial incentive at this point. So to be more focused in, chemical pharmacology and the non-laboratory style of medicine starts to really fall away. And it becomes this is not like a conspiracy. This was actually a complete change of structure. We're restructuring the way that we educate about medicine. We're then restructuring the medical model as a result. And once people are in that cycle, this is not a secret, and this is not, again, conspiracy theory. These are the facts of how they fall out and how the medical system was changed. So again, like all of those kind of ins and outs of planning and things like that are never confirmed. But this is the timeline of the shift from natural medicine to the more pharmacological model. And then at this point, this shift becomes where medicine becomes a lot more reductionistic. So this is a lot more like getting rid of specific symptoms within a certain system. So you're not taking into account that the entire body actually works as one organism, one mechanism, not separate systems. And so just like we know that estrogen and testosterone, progesterone all play a role in reproduction. However, estrogen also plays a huge role in heart health and brain health. And so understanding that just because you're adjusting estrogen so that you can, maybe you're having a hard time having a baby, you're working on infertility, that changing that doesn't just change the reproductive system, it actually changes the organism as a whole. So, and this is where a lot of these side effects come from, is that in nature, and this is one of the foundation videos within You Are the Medicine membership, we talk about this, is that when an active compound, let's say like vitamin C, is found in nature, it's found in conjunction with other molecules and enzymes. So a lot of times a fruit or a vegetable, people will take off the peel, but the peel actually has a lot of fiber in it that helps digest the sugars that are in the fruit. Let's say for an apple, for example, when you take off the peel, you're taking off a lot of the fiber that actually helps with regulating your blood sugar when you're eating carbohydrates in that amount. So it's understanding that when you find things in nature, they are actually a perfect compound. Now, not to say you can't have side effects, not to say you can't be allergic, all those things can be true, but because they are not isolated, your body actually recognizes them differently, and so it actually utilizes them differently because it is missing all of those other molecules and enzymes that are typically with it when it's in whole form. So now, okay, we have everything being pulled out as an active ingredient. So anytime you hear that or you pick up something, you're like, the active ingredient, that's what it is. And sometimes it is pulled directly from the source. Again, vitamin C pulled straight from oranges. But a lot of times what's happened is a synthetic version of this has been created. So again, this is not a part of nature. It is synthetic. It is man-made. That means the body does not recognize it in the same way, so the body doesn't utilize it in the same way. And I think this is some of where the thought behind when some people are like, wow, you just have really expensive pee, you're taking a lot of supplements and you're not really getting any benefit. Some of that is that you're utilizing supplements thinking that they're going to be like a pharmaceutical, and understanding that they often work best when they are either, again, it's not completely isolated from the rest of the organism, right? It works in function with all those things. So if you're going to take artichoke extract, it's better if you take something that's like a dehydrated artichoke rather than just the, whatever the molecule is or the active ingredient that they're trying to pull out and just taking that by itself. Does that make sense? You kind of want to take as much of things as in whole form as possible. This is why, there's that saying that like food is medicine, because it can literally change how your body absorbs these quote unquote active ingredients. Because yes, they are the thing that maybe there's the most of, but all these other little these other little molecules, which is what we go into in one of the videos that we talk about essential oils, and how even though most of the essential oil might be that primary ingredient, but all of the other, let's say 3,000 molecules that make up 0.01% of this oil actually give it and help bolster the properties of this active ingredient. So when this starts to happen, like there starts to be so much more funding that's like funneled into schools, that's funneled into research, and is really pulled away because, again, you can't sell people something that you can't patent and say is yours. You can sell it, you can sell seeds, but you can't say, those are my seeds. That's my plant. You can't, which is one of those things that I'm like, it makes for a really bad business model when you can't say that that's mine and you took that from me, or, copyright, things like this. So as this starts to change, this shift is really driven by capitalism, by materialism, and by finding some type of standardization so that it can be repeated. And so that everybody knows the same thing. When you go to, medical school, everybody learns the same thing, rather than all of these other schools where, again, you had a teacher or a mentor that you would learn from, and the way that they worked with the plants might be a little bit different than somebody else. And it's not that this was my way and this is the only way. This is how I relate to this, and this is what I've seen work. This is what I've seen do, like this. But again, you might attract a different type of clientele than somebody else. So you might utilize different things in different amounts within your practice because you attract a different kind of person. And I think that kind of changes too the way in which I always say, like, the who you choose as a practitioner matters, because whether you like it or not, their energetic field, the information that's in their physical body and the field around their body interacts with your field. That also means that it interacts with all these other things as well. Any medicine that you're taking, any beliefs that I have about that medicine or that protocol also influences you and your body's ability to accept it, to heal, all of those things. So when people, say things and they go to a doctor and they're like, well, the average life expectancy when you're diagnosed with this is 2 years. Well, now I've put my belief on you that I believe that you're probably only going to last 2 years. You have limited this person's potential. And this is why I think it becomes very fatalistic, to be honest, when you start to allow other people to control your narrative of what's possible for your body, your health, your healing. So historically, we're kind of seeing this like huge paradigm shift across the country, because all of these, nearly half of those schools are closing down, and really it's being funneled more into universities. And so it's an industrial shift. Everything starts to change. And so what happened then is this is changing how we look at education, how we look at what's, health in general. And now this biomedical dominance model, right? This allopathic, this pharmacological model this is the norm. And it's not that it's the norm, it's that it's an alternative to what was already there. And I think there's, again, a time and a place for everything. I think Western and allopathic medicine are emergency medicine, but we are utilizing it like it's our everyday lifestyle medicine because we want results quickly. We want the symptoms to stop. But what you don't understand is that symptoms almost have this, and homeopathy kind of teaches a lot further and deeper into this, but there is kind of two parts to your symptom. It's the first kind of onset of the symptom. And what happens is most people, when that happens, they find some type of pharmaceutical to suppress the symptom. And homeopathy and a lot of other natural options like herbs try to actually encourage the healing process to go completely through. So we're not trying to stop it. We're trying to encourage the body to get to the second phase where it's a healing response. So now not only are the physical symptoms that say, this is not me, this is not what health feels like to me. So all of these symptoms are trying to get rid of whatever's going on in your body. You also have the second phase where now those start to drop off and that homeostasis starts to take over. And homeopathy and other natural healing modalities their aim is to encourage that full healing response. That actually builds immunity. Stopping the symptoms at the first sign doesn't build your immunity, it suppresses it. So now what happens is we have a society that is chronically ill, chronically in pain. We have more chronic conditions, disorders, and diseases than we've ever had before, and we have more access to healthcare, quote unquote, healthcare. So make that make sense. Tell me that we're getting healthier as a nation, because we're definitely not, but we have more funding for it than we've ever had before, which is very counterintuitive to me. To me, that says there's something off there. We're missing a piece. And I think this is what we're missing is we're not inviting in the integrative approach. We're not inviting in the functional medicine. We're not inviting in the role that the nervous system plays in your health. And because the nervous system being severely dysregulated is a precursor to the level at which your immune system is functioning. So if your immune system, if you're constantly getting sick or you're constantly having flare-ups and stuff like that, your nervous system also needs attention, not just the symptoms that are coming up. If you would help your body to be able to regulate itself better, it would be able to do its job. And that's the thing, it knows how to do all of this. And that's why I tell all of my clients, your body's not broken. There's nothing wrong with your body. This is actually a perfect response to what's going on internally, which means we have to fix and see what is actually happening internally. Where is this misconception or separation happening where there is dissonance instead of resonance inside the body? So as we're kind of looking at, okay, well, what really starts to change, or how do I really start to, I hear this, I see it, maybe there's so many things that you're like, oh my gosh, I've heard like snippets of this maybe on the internet kind of floating around, but this is like blowing my mind. It's like, okay, well, I think we're actually going through a huge shift. Herbalism, naturopathy, going to an osteopath, going to a chiropractor, all of those have become so much more normalized, which is a huge win. And I think it's understanding that this shift and this change is happening because it's needed. And it's part of the reason why I created You Are the Medicine membership, because I believe you are the medicine. Your body knows how to heal itself. And so what I'm trying to do is put education back in your hands so that you can feel confident in decisions. This is for the parent who, like, every time my kid gets sick, I don't want to panic and go to the ER or go to the quick care. This is for the person who's been harmed or dismissed by the medical system. This is for the person who's like, oh, there's some shady shit's going on with our government. Like, I want to feel a little bit more sovereign. I want to feel a little bit more in control and less like I'm worried every time something happens. Because when something happens in the world that's big changes and people are freaking out, I don't freak out. I don't, because I'm like, I know the things that I can do to help my family be healthy. I know some of the options when my family starts to feel sick. I'm like, okay, you're having allergies. Let's look at some mullein. Let's look at some, we kind of go through some of these things. Let's steam some thyme. Thyme really helps to open up the bronchi and the lungs and helps to get rid of some of this discharge that's going on, or is it allergies, or are you starting to get sick? Okay, well, I have a couple of things that I keep on hand that are homeopathic remedies. And I'm like, hey, start taking this. And again, it encourages the body to start and prompt that healing response so that it finishes it completely and the body builds immunity to it rather than suppressing it. So this shift is already happening. We're already seeing it. So many people are stepping away from a conventional model, not because it doesn't have its place and not because it doesn't have value, but it is not lifestyle medicine. It is not keep you healthy medicine. It is when things come up like a broken leg or a heart attack or those types of things, that's what you need it for. You don't need it for every time you have acid reflux. There is something going on there. You don't need it for every time you have a cold. You don't need it for every time there's a rash. There are so many things that you can do for yourself that actually help the body heal and start to change and shift why the body is responding like that in the first place. Again, this is not replacing a pharmacological model with, okay, well, now we just take supplements. No, that's not it. It's that shifting the lifestyle so that you are more healthy all the time. And when things happen, again, like a sunburn or an upset stomach or, your acne, things like that that are going on, that there is something going on behind it. There's emotional, energetic, mental symptoms as well as physical. And we can't just keep addressing the physical and hope that just the other stuff goes away, because it doesn't. And we're seeing it. We're seeing the rise in the decline of mental health. Yes, because they've had physical symptoms and they've been told, here, take this. So the physical symptom might have gone away, but the mental symptom is still there. And so when we're starting to lean into, okay, well, how do I take my power back? It's by joining things like You Are the Medicine membership. It's joining these things where you can educate yourself and feel more informed so you can make informed consent. So all of this to say, again, I'm not against it. I think it has a ton of value. But I've even spoken to, oddly enough, many doctors recently that have said many things of like, this is not really what I got into medicine for. This is not what I thought it was going to be. And I'm realizing it's typically the doctors that have been in it for a long period of time, that it's not an end all be all. And it actually doesn't help most people in the way that they're wanting it to. And they incorporate a lot more natural approaches into their life before turning to a pharmaceutical. And so this shift is happening, and I think it's really important that we start to recognize that this is the resurgence. And so as you're starting to, maybe you do join the You Are the Medicine membership, there's 3 different tiers. So it's great if you want to hop in for just whatever the training is for that month, you can do that. You get all of the foundational trainings, which talk a lot about this kind of stuff for forever. Okay, so if you want to kind of revisit some of this stuff, I talk a bit about it in one of the trainings, you can revisit it. If you want to join for the year, you get access to the entire library for 1 whole year. You also have an upgraded version where you actually get one-on-one sessions with me where we do nervous system work, where we do some other things. Because if you're equipped with all the tools, but you maybe need a little bit more support, that's going to be more of your level. But it's going to be able to meet you where you're at in your health journey, or again, in just I want to feel informed. I want to feel aware. I want to feel more aware and in control of my body and the choices that I make for it. That might be a little bit more your style. So I'll put all of that in the show notes so that you can check it out. But we have phenomenal guests coming on, and that's kind of always been my aim for this podcast, is to be able to have conversations with people that are doing really interesting things that they've really had to go against the norm. They've had to do things a little bit differently to become the frequency and to become this person that they are doing these incredible things. And so stick around for more of that. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast or find me on Instagram or TikTok at Dr. Shalene Carter. I always love to see you there. But until next time, everybody, cheers.